Welcome back to Beyond the Tour. I'm Jake, and with me today, as always, is Luke. How are you?
Hi, Jake. I'm doing well. Winter, I know you'll chip me for saying that Brisbane doesn't have a winter, but certainly the weather's turned a lot fresher out there, but it does make for some great golfing conditions.
I do not feel sorry for you at all because as I look outside, it's dark and gloomy and it's been raining all morning.
Bright blue skies here in Brisbane.
We've just come off the end of a long weekend. The King's birthday, I'm so used to saying the Queen's birthday, but it was the King's birthday down here. I've been had a relatively busy weekend with the family, running around and doing whatnot. So I didn't get a huge chance to sit in front of the TV and watch a lot of golf. But
Play any golf?
I didn't know. Yeah, it was really just a family all weekend, really.
I got out to Royal Queensland on Friday and absolutely hacked the course up. So nothing to write home or talk about there.
So I'm a little bit scared of the golf course at the moment. My game has been in not a very good place for a little while. And I'm trying to stop the urge from going out there and trying to fix it up because that's a rabbit hole I'm not sure I've got the time to go down at the moment.
Yep. Swing your swing, mate.
All right, let's jump straight into it. Have a quick rundown of the week that has been. So we had the Memorial held. Scottie Scheffler was a winner. Not entirely comfortable coming down that stretch there. He ended up winning by a shot over Colin Morikawa. What were your thoughts on that particular event?
Muirfield Village, I think, was probably the star in the end. Really showed its teeth and it was a true test of golf for these players, which is something a little different to what we see normally week in, week out on the PGA Tour stop. So refreshing to see these challenging conditions. I think there were 11 players overall in the field that finished under par. They didn't have it all their own way, as they usually do. Scottie, 5th win this season. First time anyone's done that since Justin Thomas did it back in 2017. So a great achievement. He just continues to power on and totally dominating the PGA Tour this year. It's quite incredible the form that he's been in. Under pressure on Sunday, mainly because of his driving. I think he only hit 50% of his fairways, and that gave Morikawa and Hadwin a bit of a chance, but neither of them could get the job done in the end.
It didn't really, I didn't have a lot of confidence in Morikawa, really. The main thing with that, and I think it's fairly obvious very quickly into a round, just with how his putting is, and you can see if it's on or not. And so he had a lot of chances coming down 15, 16. He had a sort of 10-footer when sort of Scottie drained one on him, I think, to hold that. Was it a par putt on maybe 16? And then he had a 10-footer and it just leaked off on the low side. And yeah, when his putter is not hot or not on, if he's not inside 5 foot, you don't know whether he's going to make really much of a charge.
We saw that at Valhalla in the PGA Championship where his putter went stone cold. He was just stuck in neutral whilst everybody else was charging. So it is the key for Colin, but his iron play is elite, and we'll talk a bit about him, I think, when we get to the US Open preview.
Absolutely. Any other standouts for you?
No other standouts for me. I think Scottie's just the dominating headline. That was the main takeaway from me. His 11th career title, 2 majors now. He's equalled already the career of someone like Zach Johnson, effectively. Not far off Justin Thomas's career achievements, and 13 events to go in the PGA schedule this year. You'd have to think that he's easily going to get his 6th win for the year.
I agree, but there is one glaring problem in his resume at the moment. I don't know when he's going to win in May.
Will we ever know?
Yes, so he's debunked that theory that he's unable to win outside of February to April, which was always going to happen. It's an anomaly for it to be there in the first place. But he is by far the best golfer on the planet right now, regardless. I know there is still a little bit of commentary and discourse around the PGA Tour fields being weakened, but there's no one on the Liv side at the moment who's playing anywhere near him. So if they are in the field, they're not beating Scottie regardless anyway.
I think they're not beating him consistently. And that's the thing with Scottie. His consistency has just been incredible. Every time he tees the ball up, he is winning or he's heavily in contention. And it's just shot after shot that he's striping it down the middle of the fairway or hitting a green. And if he actually putts half decent, if he's positive in terms of strokes gained putting, he invariably wins. And Rick Gaiman had a really good graph of this on X where he showed basically each time he gets into the green instead of the red for strokes gained putting, he's going to win a championship or a tournament. Scottie will be wanting to take some putting form into Pinehurst this week. Total domination, as we say.
At Liv Houston, Carlos Ortiz won over Adrian Marunk, and Patrick Reed had a good finish as well, being the home favourite there.
Reed, that's right, performed well in front of his home crowd. Probably was never really a chance because Marunk and Ortiz had opened up a 4-stroke gap between the rest of the field coming into the 15th. Unfortunately for Marunk, he found the hazard off the tee on the par 5 15th there and made bogey in the end. And that was the difference because Ortiz was able to birdie that hole and the 2-shot swing was all she wrote. So Ortiz, with his first win on Liv, celebrated very happily with his Torquay teammates, showered with champagne, and he will be looking to take that forward for the rest of the season.
Lucas Herbert did quite well from an Aussie perspective. He had a T6. Brooks Koepka is probably the other one of note in that final round, shot a 65, which is typical of Brooks leading into a major.
I think that 7 under par round in the final round at Liv Houston will definitely have a lot of people with their eye on Brooksy coming into Pinehurst this week. As you say, Lucas Herbert played quite well. So did Leishman from a Ripper perspective. Smithy, not so, having 4 doubles and a triple in the final round there and shot an 80.
Yes, and on the team side, we had the Cleeks for their first team win.
Off the back of some good strong play from Richard Bland and also their captain Martin Keimer. Met with the expected parody from Tron at NLU. Some interesting tweets professing support for the Cleeks. He thought they'd never get it done, but of course they have now.
With all 4 scores counting, you get some wild fluctuations, don't you? It really does. It's hard to pay attention to that team side from my perspective until the final couple of holes because the swings are so fast and so violent.
And I just wonder whether they should make all 4 scores count on either all days or maybe just the final 2 days. That certainly would put the cat amongst the pigeons.
I think so. And I think we've discussed it in previous episodes I think where that becomes really interesting, I think, is when you add additional players to the roster who are not necessarily starting. Because if you have players who are completely out of form on your team and you've got all 4 scores counting, you can't have any weaknesses. So you can change out players. And that probably plays into that mid-season draft or that draft at the end of the year as well, where we see a little bit more player movement to fill those sort of gaps and to try and build on that team side of things potentially.
And we saw that the players can come in and do quite well. Ben Campbell, I think, had 5 or 6 under par for his round coming in as a substitute. I didn't see what Wade Ormsby shot though.
He was 1 under. I think he might have ended up at 1 under.
But certainly Ben Campbell performed really well coming in at last minute there. And there's certainly some evolution that can happen in the team side with Liv.
Wade Ormsby was a 1 under in his final round and 1 over in round 2. So that's his thereabouts. What was trying to watch both tournaments, they both finished essentially at the same time. I think Houston is in an hour different time zone to the Memorial in Ohio, but it seemed to be a little bit of a whiff from my perspective with Liv having the ability to control their start time, why they would run it to finish at the same time as the Memorial.
And obviously they've got less events in their calendar, so more flexibility with their scheduling to start with in terms of the weeks that they schedule events. And as you say, with the shotgun start, that probably gives them another level of flexibility again as to when they actually kick off. It was difficult to watch both and to really get engaged in both the way that you'd like to as a fan, and hopefully Liv can work around that in a bit more sensible way going forward.
I think obviously the reason it's been done is because we've got the US Open this week. So they're trying to get reps into players, or it's probably from the perspective of the players where they want to be playing the week before Yeah, and of course they're probably a little bit hamstrung in the fact that it therefore probably needs to be in the US, which they're running up with issues in terms of getting courses and putting. So that all plays into it, I think. But they certainly had control over the start time. Ideally, this would be a West Coast event. West Coast in June is probably a good time to be over there. And we don't see a lot of West Coast golf after sort of February, March. So I think that would be ideal to be there. It puts you into a time zone that's 3 hours prior or 3 hours after the East Coast. And it would be very complimentary to be able to do that. Now, obviously, potentially it's the courses or trying to get access to a course that they can actually do that on, given the monopoly that the PGA holds in the States at the moment.
That's right. So there's no doubt some challenges that sit behind the scenes that we don't see, but hopefully it is something that they can iron out and get the scheduling right for next year.
Definitely. I think, as I said, just to at least get it out of the same sort of finishing time, because it should be complementary if they're going to compete against each other.
I'm sure there's some trump courses in California that welcome Liv. There might be some choice there.
Yes. Now, over on the DP World Tour, we had the Scandinavian Mixed event, which was won by Linn Grant for the second time in 3 years. It looked like it was going to be a snooze fest. I went to bed before even turning it on because Soderberg was, I think he was 8 shots up. Or was he 11 at one point even, potentially?
Linn was 11 shots behind to start the day. And as you say, Soderberg had an 8-shot lead there. And just a tragic sort of finish for him where he got the putting yips and Linn Grant came from the clouds to win it. A great achievement for her. She was the first female to win on the DP World Tour, and now she's the first woman to win twice on the DP World Tour. You've got a feel for Soderberg, and I saw some footage of him in the scorer's hut afterwards where he looked pretty inconsolable, as you would be, missing, I think he 3-putted 18 to fall out of a playoff. So sorry scenes for Soderberg and happy scenes for Linn Grant.
I'll tell you what, when I woke up in the morning, I went to check the scores and I'm like, Jesus, he's just choked that away. And I wanted to go and check his hole-by-hole scores. I couldn't work out how to find hole-by-hole scores on the European Tour website.
You'd think they'd have that worked out. The other thing that I noticed, just before we jumped on the pod, I was looking for some footage on the DP World social accounts for Soderberg's highlights or lowlights, shall we call them, and they've been scrubbed from social media history. So shooting 77 in the final round, you probably can't complain too much, particularly where Linn Grant went out and shot 65.
Yeah. On the LPGA Tour, we had Linnea Strom, who had a 60 in the final round. She went out in the third group of the morning and held on to win by a shot.
Just unbelievable. Narrowly missing out on the magic 59. Another Swedish winner for the week. I think she could believe what had happened, and certainly when you look at the scores there, it is quite unbelievable. Some decent players in the field too there with Megan Kang and Titikul, and I see Jenny Shin rounded out the top 10 there at T9.
Now let's move on to the US Open this week. Now, I think maybe just to tie in from the Liv Houston, Cam Smith finished the day double, triple, and ended up with 4 double bogeys in his last sort of 8 holes, I think it was, plus the triple. Did you see what happened there?
No, I didn't see any of it. Obviously, it would have been dropped from coverage with having that many scores, but certainly quite shocking to see. We know that Smithy can get wayward with the driver, and that course there in Houston certainly does have some trouble lurking, but it has to be more than just a wayward driver to be shooting 80 and having 4 doubles and a triple in your round.
It's not super promising coming into the US Open. Now, this was what I'd pencil marked this particular US Open venue, Pinehurst, as being Cam's probably most suited US Open venue, playing similar to what we see on the sandbelt down here in Victoria, and him being used to firm and fast conditions, lots of shaved runoff areas. And with Cam's short game, it looked like it was setting up perfectly for him, but his form doesn't look very good of recent time.
No, and I think the things that you've called out on the course are the things that would be licking his lips at, and he may still well perform. Talked about the the narrowing sort of the firm and fast conditions, you talked about those, and we do expect it from what we're hearing to be that way. I saw some commentary from last year's champion Wyndham Clark saying that greens are already borderline, whether accurate or it's some sandbagging and a shot across the bow of the USGA early on from the players remains to be seen. But yes, it certainly does set up where those players that have supreme short games and excellent putting skills should be able to come to the fore. I saw a clip from Golf Channel earlier where they had Johnson Wagner out there putting him through his paces again, chipping off the tight Bermuda grass onto one of the greens. And he demonstrated not only how he's struggling with his own chipping game, but I think more so he demonstrated just how good these elite players are with their short game, the level of precision and pure strike that you need in order to hit your landing spots. If you're chipping from the collection areas and the tight grass around these greens, the level of precision that you need is extreme, and that's very, as you say, very similar to sandbelt conditions, and also a course like Royal Queensland where Smithy's won before. We'll have to see how he turns it round in a short amount of time. You'd think it's going to be a major challenge for him to be able to do that, but he is a major champion and he's got that Aussie fighting spirit that we love to see.
He's been positive strokes gains approach in 2 of his last 8 events. That has typically been an area of his game which has also been quite good. His driver has been a liability, but his approach game has been a liability of recent time as well. And he's been really heavily reliant on his putting and around the green.
And this golf course at Pinehurst is very much a second shot golf course. The flyovers that the USGA have put out in conjunction with Pinehurst show how small the landing areas are and the green complexes are similar to Augusta in that sense, where you've got a small target, and if you hit your target, you're rewarded with a short birdie putt or a good look at your putt, but it will repel mediocre or poor shots and really force a very tough up and down. Strokes around the green, strokes gained around the green will be important, putting will be important, but also to avoid putting yourself in those difficult spots, the strokes gained approach will be a premium as well.
It's going to be really interesting to see this week. We're now 10 years since we last went to Pinehurst on the men's professional side, just to see what effect distance has had on how they play the course. I went through Google Earth this morning, just looking at landing zones and where potentially greens and bunkers pinch in the fairways. It looks fairly open still to me. Like it looks like playing quite aggressively if you're not an elite iron player, playing aggressively might be your play, because you're going to get close to the greens. You're going to have a better chance of getting it and keeping it on the green as well, potentially as well, depending on how firm they are. But that may blow it out a little bit about how many competitors and who's going to be competing. But certainly Scottie Scheffler's number one. Regardless of the course, he's probably the player.
There's a couple of different schools of thought on how the tournament will play out with the course set up. Listening to the Fried Eggs preview was very much a thought that the pinch areas in the fairway, the narrowing of the fairways around the sort of 300 to 315 yard landings could well disadvantage some of the bigger hitters and give the shorter hitters, say someone like a Zach Blair, more of a chance in this particular tournament. So you've got that school of thought, but the big hitters do tend to work it out. When Bryson won at Wingfoot, a lot of people said he's just not going to be able to bomb and gouge his way around that course. It will find him out. The green complexes are too challenging for him to be able to do that. Yet he still found a way to win. A couple of different schools of thought, and we'll have to wait until sort of Monday morning our time to find out.
What else have we got on that? So, yeah, Scottie Morikawa, obviously we touched on him earlier. He's having a good season today, his form line started turning around at the Masters, but since then he has been competing most weeks with the caveat of that putter still not getting hot in any of the weeks, really.
That's right. The iron play's elite. He's trending well in terms of his form. A big question mark, though, on how he plays in the wind. We know that he's got that stock shot of the butter cut or the baby fade, and in windy conditions, that ball just gets eaten up. If it does get windy at Pinehurst, that may change his chances, but certainly if conditions are mild, his approach shot and his current form, I think, will see him in contention.
It's looking like the forecast is pretty mild and benign conditions most of the weekend. Maybe Saturday it looks like it gets a little windier, but we're not talking anything that would affect someone like Colin, I wouldn't imagine. We're in the early sort of teens kilometres per hour winds. That won't affect a professional golfer. Okay, so continuing on, a few of the other I'd highlighted a couple others looking at, I actually looked at Rick Gurman's site as well, looking at his Rick Runs Good, some of his custom modelling and whatever, and picked out a few things. Rory, I think he's certainly someone that is going to be again up there. His game's quite well suited here, I think, as well. He's been putting pretty solidly. His approach game this year, I think, has been improved compared to previous years. Obviously, his driver is elite. So he's a huge chance, I think, at this particular venue.
But it's a major, Jake.
It's a major, I know. I didn't.
No, look, you'd never say Rory can't win. Of course he can win, and he's good enough to beat anyone in the world, anywhere in the world. So you would never write Rory off. In a decade since he won a major, and we have seen time and time again him get close but not be able to close it out for various reasons, or come screaming through with a backdoor top 10 or a top 5 after being out of contention in the earlier round. Certainly not putting a line through Rory, but how many times can he fool us into believing?
I know. He has to win one. Surely he's going to win one.
We say that every major.
That is also, again, he's the second best golfer in the last 12 months. Didn't have a fantastic week at the Memorial, but he should be well in the mix again this particular week. And I'm very positive on Xander now that he's got that monkey off his back and he's won a major. I think that will maybe free him up a little bit, and hopefully he can capitalise on it given how in form he is.
It'll be interesting to see how he goes now that he's broken the major seal, and whether he feels a lot more comfortable in the major environment and he truly believes that he can get it done. A good test for Xander to see how he backs up in this next major coming off his win there at Valhalla.
Jon Rahm, he obviously WD'd out of Houston with a foot infection, I think. It was like a blister or something in between his toes. He was playing reasonable golf on that first day. After, there was a clip going around of him wincing in pain, having hit a tee shot. But after that, he got himself to 3 or 4 under. So he was playing reasonably well, and then WD'd after 6 holes on the Saturday.
Right. It's hard to know how bad the injury actually is. I saw some reporting this morning, I think maybe from Brentley Romine, that he wasn't on course on Monday and not likely to be on course at Pinehurst on Tuesday either. So maybe he's giving himself the maximum amount of time to recover. He's been pretty quiet, so there's been nothing publicly released to my knowledge about the finer details of the injury. And as we know, a lot's been made of by the various talking heads of Rahm being unhappy at Liv and he's a shadow of his former self, etc. I think all those things will just play into Rahm's hands, and I say beware the wounded Spanish bull.
Other chances from the Liv guys, Brooks, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, it's major Brooks. Expect him to be performing quite well. I think probably the one thing that from his game that sort of stands out when I look at the numbers, is his putter seems to be very problematic at the moment, and it's very unusual compared to major winning Brooks. So I'm just not sure. There's that little question mark on that putter or whether or not he can get that right.
You can't talk majors without talking Brooksy, and it seems that he just relishes the big events. The harder, the better for him. So I expect him to be up this week. As you say, the putting can be not where it needs to be at times. I think we'll get an indication early on in round 1 how he's going to be. If he makes those must-make 5-8 footers, then I think we'll see a real charge from Brooks, because the rest of the game is just rock solid and so dependable when the pressure is on. We saw that in Singapore event where he was asked to hit a number of contesting shots coming down the stretch and he just never faltered. So expect him to be in the mix if his putting's on song.
What do you think of Bryson's chances?
Look, I think Bryson is a good chance in the sense that he's won this event before. I think he's a more mature and well-rounded player now than when he was during his win at Wingfoot a few years back. He's contended at the Masters. He held the lead at the Masters earlier this year, but eventually dropped away. He finished only a shot back from Xander at the PGA, so he's really given both those majors a good shake. His live form last week at Houston was average, I would say, and he had quite a few bogeys on the card. But I think he'll work that out on the range. And one thing is for sure, Bryson is not afraid of hard work, and he will put in the hours and the time to get the results. And so I do expect that we'll see a really big turnaround from what we saw at Liv Houston the week just gone to what we're going to see now at Pinehurst this coming week.
I think this is going to be a big test just to see how he's going to handle the hard conditions. Bryson seems to be able to bully a course, and he performs really well when not necessarily super hard. Just with his sort of temperament, he seems to get a little bit, we saw it a little bit on the Sunday at Augusta, where when things got hard, he just made a few silly mistakes. So it'll be interesting to see how he handles golf course, which is going to be so demanding mentally. And yeah, he's certainly got the game, all aspects of his game to actually compete. But it's just, I think mentally we'll see, and we'll know that quite early as well, I think.
The other thing I'm interested to see is what sort of crowd support Bryson has. I really feel like Bryson has turned a corner in terms of his public support, and maybe much as if this has got to do with the YouTube and social media content that he puts out there. He's really good with the fans. We've seen many clips with him being genuine and engaging with the fans. And if you take that back a few years ago, where he was parodied by a lot of commentators and golf influencers, he was awkward, and I guess he was a bit of a villain in the game. I feel like that persona, he's been able to shed that to a large extent and has tapped into more mainstream support now, which I think is great to see. And look, a lot of that's probably due to the fact that he has matured and maybe shown a bit more of an authentic and genuine side to him in terms of his interactions with fans and whatnot. But if he's got the support of the crowd at Pinehurst, I think he'll be really buoyed by that and will ride that for all that he can.
I was thinking about him the other day. I think the topic of slow play come up, and he was someone, obviously he was ridden very hard early on because he was a turtle. He was so slow. And he almost for a time refused to believe it, but he went off and over the past 12, 18 months has sped right up. Like I watched him at Adelaide, and he was up the backside of the group in front at all times, which is a real credit to him. The other thing that he was getting a lot of criticism over was his not calling for when hitting a wayward tee shot. And the same thing, he went off and he fixed it up, and he's now probably gone the other way where it's a bit of a show seeing him yell for because he's so loud and so boasts over it. But I think that one thing about Bryson is that he learns and he wants to take in as much as possible and trying to make himself better. So maybe that's going to hopefully prove me wrong in terms of maybe that mental side of the game as well. Maybe he will learn from the mistakes he's made in the past.
And I'll be the first to admit that I've done a full 180 on Bryson. I was totally out on him many years ago and actively rooting against him in some of those tournaments. And now I can appreciate him as a player and as an ambassador for the game. Still has his quirky moments, no doubt, and as everybody, I guess, does. But I'll certainly be hoping to see him up the top of the leaderboard and really in contention because life's good for golf.
It is, absolutely. And I've always loved Bryson. I think when I come into sort of golf back in 2015, sort of him coming up through his amateur stage, winning the US amateur, and he's come down to Huntingdale and he played in the Aussie Masters, or he ended up second. But I was watching him, following him around, watching him interact with the crowd. He was really good. He's very quirky. And so I was playing Cobra clubs because off the back of him, really. So he was my first sort of golfing crush.
And I saw him play at the 2019 President's Cup, and this was probably peak sort of anti-Bryson moments, and the Aussie crowd was very anti-Bryson. And I think he struggled with that. He copped a lot of shit from the fans, some of it in good humour, but some of it probably over the top in reality. And he did struggle with that. But I do remember seeing him hit just an absolutely blistering tee shot going up 18. I think he ended up winning that final singles match on the last day there. The guy has just got incredible talent, and now if he can garner the crowd support as well, that can be a pretty potent combination.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of change, do you think Scottie has changed since his celebration? Like, it wasn't a huge celebration, but it meant a lot. You could see he gave the big fist pump after holing his putt on Sunday. I think that's probably, from my perspective, the most emotion I've seen from him.
I'd agree with that. That stood out to me as well. It was a much more pronounced celebration than we've seen from Scottie. Don't know whether the memorial has any particular meaning to him in terms of family history or whatnot, but it definitely did stand out. Sure, if it's correlated to the arrest, maybe blowing off a bit of steam, but certainly it did stick out in my mind too.
He seemed to have quite a lot of support there as well in terms of the crowds. So you'd probably expect that at Pinehurst. He's going to come into this with a lot of pressure on him. So that will also be quite interesting.
And Scottie is more of a subdued personality, but his crowd support and his fan base has been growing and growing. Having the results that he's had almost demands the attention and the fandom. But certainly you can feel that swell of support for him and the public's interest in him growing.
Now, just before switching to the Aussies in the field, a couple others that I had highlighted, I think that probably good chances. On the Liv side, I think Tyrrell Hatton looks like he's going to be someone that should perform quite well here. And then outside of those guys, again, probably looking at Mean Dean. He's in pretty good form. And not too many others that I see on the Liv side that are jumping out at me, though.
I'm interested to see how David Puig goes.
Yeah.
He's really been trending well, and now that he's got the opportunity, I'd expect he'll be wanting to grab it both hands. So that'll be interesting to see how he goes. Burmester's been one of the standout Liv players. I would agree with you on that point of view. And I guess Sergio's the other one as well. He had a sneaky finish in the Liv Houston event. Has been playing pretty well. We'll see how he travels as well.
We can't consider Martin Keimer as we can't, can we?
I don't think so. He had the lead there at one stage at Liv Houston, fell away in the end, and I suspect even if he gets hot for a round or two at Pinehurst, it'll be nothing more than sentimental reminiscing, and I don't expect him to be there come Sunday afternoon.
Now, Aussies in the field, if I'm just going to read down the list, we've got Cam Davis, Cam Smith, Jason Day, Minwoo Lee, Jason Scrivener, and Adam Scott.
I'm not particularly bullish on the Aussies' chances this time round. We've talked about Smithy, who both of us had him penciled in as the Aussies' best hope, and our confidence in that's been really shaken by what we saw on the weekend. Not ruling Smithy out, but it's going to be tough work to turn that around in such a short amount of time. Cam Davis, I don't think he's shown that he's a big-time major player yet. Poked his head up on the leaderboard at the Masters and crapped the bed almost as soon as he got up there. So I don't think Cam's really going to be giving it a shake. Jason Day, for me, is probably our best chance outside of Smithy, in the sense that his form this year has been reasonable We know that he's got a great short game and he's one of the best putters on tour. So those things stack up well for Pinehurst. It probably just comes down to his iron play.
Yeah.
And whether he can be as accurate in hitting those small targets on the greens as he needs to be. But if he does, we know that he's going to be deadly with that putter if he gets a lot of looks at 8 or 10 feet. So Jason, for me, probably is the Aussie's best chance. For me, is a bit of a wild card. We know Min Woo can go really low. This is not a usual sort of PGA Tour stop or DP World Tour stop. So having probably not seen a lot of the course or played it a lot, it might take a while for him to work out, and whether you can give these really top guys a head start like that remains to be seen. But Woozy's probably a bit of a wild card for me. Jason Scrivener has been battling on the DP World Tour. He's, I think, 109th in the race to Dubai standings at the moment. Has missed missed the cut in 3 out of his last 5 events. So you'd think that's going to be a really big challenge for him to make a splash at Pinehurst in this event. And then I'd be interested in your thoughts on Scottie. He's now going to be playing in, I think, maybe his 94th or 95th consecutive major, which is an incredible achievement. But is he doing anything more other than making up the numbers?
Oh, I think it'll probably depend a little bit around how he's performing around the greens. He's a pretty solid iron player. Obviously off the tee, he's more than competitive and he'll hold his own there. And his putter has been relatively solid as well. I think he's going to be up there with Jason Day, maybe as Australia's best chance, just depending on how he's around the greens.
And I expect to see Scottie putting Martin from around the greens. I don't think that he will be mixing it up, taking a lob wedge or a 56 degree on this tight grass. We have seen him do this before in terms of putting on undulating greens from off the green. So that will be his plan of attack around Pinehurst. And your point is well made about the iron play. If he can hit these greens and have more greens in regulation, then that puts less pressure on his scrambling game. And I think that's where he gets unstuck for me, is his ability to scramble repeatedly, where he's constantly putting that short game under pressure. And that's why I think we see too many bogeys on the cards, apart from the occasional errant tee shot. But if you need Scottie to get up and down, your life better not depend on it. There'd be a lot of other players that you'd want the club in the hands of.
Yeah, I think as long as it's going to come down to where he's missing it, isn't it, with his approach. If he's missing in the right areas, he's going to be able to pull out that putter and maybe take a bit of pressure off that short game. But if he's short-sighting himself or missing in the wrong areas where he can't use that putter, it might get pretty hard for him.
Yeah, agree. Just a few more questions on Pinehurst before we move on. We've got 12 live players in the field. I think for Valhalla there was 17, and we set the overs and unders live player in the top 10 line at 1.5. I think we keep it at 1.5. And what's your sort of take this time round?
I'm not as confident as I was there. I don't know. I'd be impressed to see 1 in the top 10, to be honest, if we're anything more than 1. So I guess I'm taking the unders.
Take the unders. Top live player in the field?
I think I've got to pick one. I'm going to say Hatton.
And then top Aussie?
Top Aussie, I'll take Scottie.
You'll take Scottie, yeah. I think unders for live players in top 10 be 1. Top live player, I'm going to say Brooks. And then top Aussie, as I say, I think it's Jason Day or a red hot Min Woo who catches some lightning in a bottle.
Do you have an outsider?
That's a good question. Look, I think from an outsider's perspective, it's hard to say who's actually an outsider that's right, when you don't see this course played a lot of times and it brings a lot of other players into contention. But look, I am going to go the real outsider and say I think DJ is due for a big.
He's considered absolutely an outsider. So yeah, I'm happy with that selection. And I'm going to take, for an outsider, I'm going to take Alex Noren. Now, I think that's a decent sort of look at Pinehurst, isn't it?
Yeah, thorough review or preview, and just can't wait for getting it now.
Likewise, yeah, this is probably my most anticipated US Open for a little while. You know what? One I was really impressed with was Chambers Bay. I like the ball on the ground. I like options. This style of golf is what I play a lot of down here, a lot of linksy style of golf, but yeah, a lot of options. So we're going to see a variety of golf being played. So it's going to be a good weekend.
Yeah, it'll be much different to a place like Bethpage Black or those types of courses. So I think it's going to be a fantastic tournament.
Actually, one last thing on that. Did Adam Scott end up getting in through his final qualifying, or was he admitted through the top 60 in the end? He finished 61st in OWGR, but I think the death of Grayson Murray might have pushed him up potentially. I'm not sure
That's my understanding, is that he was brought forward off the alternates list. May well have still made it, even if he remained on the alternates list, but was elevated because Grayson Murray has been removed from the top 60 OWGR rankings, and that made way for Scottie to get the tournament.
Other event, there's only really the other major event really on the LPGA Tour is the Meijer Classic. That's over in Missouri. Who's playing in that one?
So we've got some notables in the field there: Nelly Korda, Lilia Vu, Celine Boutier, Lexi Thompson, and a couple of Aussies in Minjee Lee and Grace Kim. Solid event, but it'll be struggling to gain attention against the US.
I think maybe is Lilia Vu, she's been off for a little bit, hasn't she? I think. So is this maybe her first tournament in all
Yeah, I think that's right. And return event.
All right. So in other news or other sort of occurrences through the week, we had Brandel going on the NLU podcast. Yeah, I haven't listened to that particular episode yet, so I don't have a lot of context to add. Have you? I believe you have.
I've seen the grabs, as we know, and Solly, two of the outspoken golf commentators going around, had a bit of a Twitter spat earlier in the year where they were arguing with each other over advertising and production quality for the broadcast. And so it was interesting to see Brandel go on the NLU pod. Credit to both of them for getting and leaning into the conflict and the controversy, as we've been talking about on this pod, where there's great engagement to be gained from that. Not surprisingly, I understand they bonded over their mutual disdain or distaste for Liv. And there was quotes running around from Brandel talking about how Liv's a laughable product. They play music, they don't play the courses the way the architects intend them to be. And he's still banging on about the corruption and the blood money from Saudi Arabia. He doesn't seem to realise that the rest of the world has moved on and that the sports washing and blood money argument is just falling on deaf ears largely. There's a small cohort of people that still get riled up about that, but when they look more broadly at what's happening in global sports like soccer and Formula One, etc., and even women's golf, the argument just doesn't stack up anymore for being a reason to avoid the investment. Yes, they had Brandel on the pod there, and afterwards saw Luke Elvy tweeted out that this is what happens when people who exist in a bubble get together and complain to each other, which draw a pretty sharp and quick response from Tron at NLU, where he said to Luke, look, I'm shocked that the USGA have asked you to commentate on the Pinehurst event coming up for the international feed. And he tweeted a meme of a shark with a sucker fish attached to it, indicating or implying that Luke was the sucker fish to the shark. Always a bit of banter and a bit of fun in and around the NLU guys.
Yeah, those two.
And Brandel, I guess.
No, Brandel is another story, but Tron and Luke Elvy seem that this is an on-running. It's been running for a long time, I think, pretty much since Liv's come on the scene and Luke started talking about it. But yeah, I'm not sure what Tron's problem with Luke is, because I don't know. Listening to Luke stuff, it's controversial in that he's supporting Liv and whatnot, but he doesn't seem like he's way out. I don't know. It's a weird one to me.
No, and look, maybe there's some backstory to it that we're not aware of, but
yeah,
it's interesting watching anyway, nonetheless.
And Brandel, of course, he'll fight with anybody. AK is the other one that is getting a few headlines at the moment, with him and Brandel getting quite personal.
That's right. Yeah, I did see that.
And probably the other really big news for the week was really not news in itself anyway, really, at the end. It was the PGA Tour transaction subcommittee meeting with the PIF in New York.
much ado about nothing in the end.
Yeah.
Tiger and Adam Scott, I think, were the player directors to meet with the PIF in person, along with the other senior PGA Tour brass. Rory was playing at Memorial, so he wasn't able to join in person, but we understand he joined virtually for the meeting. Rory made some interesting comments about the meeting, saying that it was big boy stuff. I think more interestingly were his comments around Liv, saying that he doesn't see Liv slowing down in the next couple of years and that he hoped to see more of a collaboration and cross-pollination with players being able to play on both tours. Now, I think that would have irritated a number of the US player directors and players that have been wanting to see sanctions and penalties and reparations against the Liv players that defected, and also the fans and the players that just want to see Liv shut down in its entirety. So interesting comments from Rory. The PGA Tour released a statement after the meeting, which was just really a lot of words saying absolutely nothing. So for me, there doesn't seem to be any meaningful progress. Jake, are we ever going to see a deal happen? And at what point do they call it quits and decide to move on?
I don't think it's beneficial at this point for a deal to happen, really. It may be an understanding of, there's a few probably points that both sides would like to see conceded, but it seems like where we are now is probably where it's going to fall. And maybe there's just a little bit of cross-pollination, not much, I can't see.
And it feels like there's many vested interests working against a deal.
Yeah.
So it just seems to be dragging on. We're past the 12-month mark now, so we're a year and 5 days beyond June anniversary. And you would think that if a deal was going to be crunched, it would have been crunched by now. And that gets back to my point of, when do you draw a line and then say, okay, this is not going to happen?
We're just not seeing any sort of concessions or any goodwill at all being made, particularly on behalf of the PGA Tour. Maybe we are starting to see that a little bit with the DP World Tour. But yeah, like the stuff around Blandy, not them going out of their way to disinvite Blandy or to make it clear that he's not welcome on the Champions Tour, or even some of it was Bernd Wiesberger not being able to play in the co-sanctions or the PGA Tour owned co-invited, I wouldn't call them co-sanctioned, but co-invited DP World Tour tournaments because he has played in Liv events in the past. So I think they're still going out of their way to make sure it's clear that Liv is not welcome in the...
That was very petty, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it was. And yeah, I think maybe the DP World Tour is waking up a little bit into what their position is, and maybe that's where a deal's going to get done.
And the only concessions that we're seeing are actually coming from the majors. So they're seeing the writing on the wall, in my view. But we've got the transaction subcommittee and the player directors continuing to maintain the line that things are progressing well and it's all positive. It's just a complicated thing that takes some time to work out. You can merge two massive companies in a very complex corporate deal much, much quicker than what's happening here.
From my perspective, it's all PGA Tour side. I don't know. There's so many interests I think there's been so many hidden interests in the tour and how money is made in and around the tour. I've said it previously about the PGA Superstore and ownership structures there. I think there's a lot of these deals that have happened over the course of time, which have funneled money away from the players, that it's just too hard to, it's so intertwined that maybe they're just afraid of breaking that up. What would happen in terms of some of these other people knowing where the bodies are buried?
I think that's true. And so it's not surprising that we're not seeing any progress in that regard.
And then finally, Nate Lashley, beat up on Jay Monahan.
Yeah, had some choice words for Jay. Nothing surprising, but said that he's chicken shit and won't stand up to a handful of guys. I'm not sure who he's referring to, possibly Tiger and co. But we know that Nate's had form before in terms of leaking on the tour where he published the full PIP results on accounts. So always good to keep an eye on Nate's up to.
Yeah. And I think mostly being hamstrung. Maybe he's protecting himself a little bit by not speaking up and trying to get himself looked potentially. But for the most part, I think it's clear that he doesn't have much power.
Not at the moment. Probably different pre-6 June last year.
Yeah.
And he abused that power and he broke the trust of the people that are of his main stakeholder groups, i.e. the players. So the fact that he's got no power now is just a function of the way that he exercised that power in the lead up to the framework agreement being announced. And I don't have a lot of sympathy for Jay. It would be a difficult position for him to be in that is one of his own creation. For me, I think he's dead man walking until this is resolved. They're going to let him try and be a caretaker CEO whilst others are calling the shots. He's there to implement and do as he's told. And once a definitive decision has been made on the way forward for the PGA Tour and what looks like, I think Jay will be making way for a new leader.
All right, Luke, that's a good coverage. I'm looking forward to the weekend of golf and hopefully come out with, I'd prefer not to see a random winner. I'd like to see one of the big names take something.
Yeah, it's going to be a great weekend ahead. Agreed. We don't want a winner. We want a worthy winner of a US Open at Pinehurst. And I look forward coming back, talking all things with you in a recap next week.
Lovely. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll speak to you again in 7 days' time.